I am John Gulliver, and I'm here to introduce the seminar series and our speaker. But first, I'd like to say it's rewarding to see so many people who have braved the snow and especially the traffic. It was a little bit difficult getting in, mostly because of the traffic, not necessarily the snow. But this seminar series is funded through the University of Minnesota Water Resources Center, the Clean Water Legacy Amendment, the Clean Water Council of Minnesota, and supported in kind by the Cold Climate Stormwater Center of Excellence. That's a lot of sponsors, funded by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and co-directed by the University of Minnesota and the University of New Hampshire, in partnership with the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance. So everyone, this has become pretty successful, and everyone wants a part of it, which is good. That's good. Okay. The Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series is also in partnership with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and hosted at the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory. For those of you online, please use the Q&A function within Zoom to post your questions for our keynote presentation and expert panel discussion. This is a special seminar because our speaker is Robert Traver. Rob is a professor and the Edward A. Daler Chair in Civil Engineering. He's also a director of both Villanova Urban Stormwater Partnership and the Villanova Center for Resilient Water Systems, actually a past director, I think. He served as the president of the American Academy of Water Resources Engineers and as a committee member of the National Research Council Committee that authored Urban Stormwater Management in the United States. Rob's main area of research is sustainable green stormwater infrastructure. He initiated the Stormwater Control Measure Demonstration and Research Park in the Villanova campus, which has transformed the Villanova campus into a living laboratory with on-site experimental projects such as green roofs, rain gardens, stormwater wetlands, pervious concrete, and porous asphalt. So you can see that Rob's a nationally recognized expert in sustainable stormwater management. He received the 2019 Environmental and Water Resources Lifetime Achievement Award. This award is presented to a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers for demonstrating a lifelong level of commitment to environmental or water resources engineering through public service, research, or education. And Rob does all three, so I guess that makes sense. Rob served in the National Guard for 27 years, is a veteran of Desert Storm, and retired as a lieutenant colonel. He's one of the few professors who can say he has actually driven a bulldozer. Rob has also performed local service, serving as the chair of the Pennsylvania Stormwater Management Symposium for over 20 years, and has been actively working on the new Pennsylvania Stormwater Manual. So today he will be talking about the green stormwater revolution. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Robert Traver.
All right, I think I hit the right button. So, all right, first of all, if I want to say that is not what we want. That is a Maryland rain garden in front of a house or sand filter, taking up the whole front yard. How long do we think that's going to be there before somebody covers it over and puts it in? So that's not what we want. And I do want to emphasize of course, there we go, the former director. I stepped down. I'm at 50% for the university, so I could actually think and do research again, not all that administrative burden. Basically, whenever, as a professor, you say we have to include our students, like Rebecca, and basically our other professors. I have a very nice group up there at Villanova right now. Bridget Wadzig, who's spoken here, and Virginia are both now associate in running the center that I created years ago. Kristen Sample-Lord is a geotech engineer. We have John Comlos, a water environmental type engineer. Kelly is a little mixture in environmental and water systems. Amanda Hess is a research professor. Jerry Zaremba runs kind of our watershed research instrumentation group. We are also working with other departments looking at machine learning and artificial intelligence and sensors and all this stuff I really don't understand, but I know how to use, so that's a good thing. Basically, our agenda, I'm going to talk about the challenge for a minute because we always have to remember that. Where we started, now wait a second, starting at 9:05. That's not, oh, that's the time. I got it. All right. I feel better. Scared me for a second. What we have learned, what I think we can do now, and what I still need to know is my thought process. And that has got to be the ugliest detention bond I've ever seen in my life. It's even worse than the one we just saw a second ago. That's in California someplace. But anyway, the challenge, and back to the National Academy project that I worked on, I really like this one statement. I think it really sums up a lot of stuff. It's the conversion of land from the urban to the, from the grass, green areas to the urban, and what effect it's done on our water systems. And the last statement gives you a pause. These changes have degraded water quality and habitat in virtually every urban stream. And is that true? Yeah, look at the 303D list. This is from 2015. I don't know why I couldn't find a more current version on the web, but basically it's not good. And some of these areas that I think are redder than others, I think it's just done more sampling and found more areas where that's be the case. Okay, back in 1978, the Pennsylvania Drainage Code was 2 pages of mimeograph sheets. And a manual we're working on now is like 600 pages. So it's little change in the regulations. But tell me, how can you not reasonably change the quality or quantity in a natural channel? I don't know how you would implement that on a regulatory basis or even as an engineer in design. I just thought this was kind of interesting. And then shopping centers, you need to take reasonable precautions. All right, and I don't know how that happens either. And the drainage days, we just moved the water out of the way. That was the whole purpose. Then in Pennsylvania in 1978, following Hurricane Agnes a couple years previously, the state legislature put in a new law. And what they said was to address inadequate management of accelerated runoff of stormwater resulting from development throughout a watershed. It's always kind of comical that a hurricane caused them to do this, and these sites really don't help that much in a hurricane. But anyway, back then we used TP40, which is a rainfall map of the United States. And there it is on the right. So you go in, you look where you are, pick the button, and that's exactly the 2-year storm or the 10-year storm. And what we used was 2, 10, 25, 50, and 100-year extreme events, 24-hour storm, the design storm using the SES type 2 distribution, and match pre-construction peak flows. Does that sound familiar? Still doing basic, this is really based on a lot of what we're still doing for right or wrong. SAS TR55 was fairly new as replacing the modified rational method. I still have engineers in Pennsylvania insist using the modified rational method, even though we've outlawed it for about 5 or 10 years there in Pennsylvania. Calculators, the only computers was the surveying group, only had the HP computers. Routing, we used curves. We really didn't do routing of the water through the systems. And the results, we built very, 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 very large detention basins. And that's my 1978 Oldsmobile Omega, so I can guarantee that was what happened in that particular period of time. I now use that as a bad example, by the way. Too deep for vegetation growth, heat, and all that sort of good stuff. But anyway, and basically the act was revised in 1983 to address problem areas. So then you would have some areas because of stream restrictions where you would have the 100-year storm would have to be reduced to the 50-year storm or 25-year storm using the release rate method. And so that resulted in bigger detention basins. All right. So ASCE journals at the time were telling us this may not be working quite so well. Back even that far. So basically, Rich McEwen, a personal favorite of mine and from Maryland, talked about the question is, are we really effectively meeting the intent of stormwater management? Phil Bedient had an article that talked about the major sources of stream pollution is coming from the urban non-point source, which shows how good we were doing at reducing the wastewater treatment, I would say, in some ways. And in 1988, Rich McEwen and Glenn Moglen both talked about the basins are ineffective in controlling degradation of erosive channels. Not that we paid attention to any of this, but the science was telling us this along the way. And Glenn Moglen at the time was an undergraduate student, so he's going to be working for a lot longer. He's very famous in this area as well. And so then we had a boring decade or two. Nothing changed. We're still doing this. We know it's not working and trying to figure out what to do next. I like this. This was an eBay for sale. It was during a drought. It's a Texas rain gauge. It was going up for 11 cents. I wish I had bought it. I thought that was pretty amusing. So anyway, now the next phase that really shifted things was MPDES, phase 2, and the green infrastructure starting to come up with some of the ideas. MPDES phase 2 really started looking at the non-point source pollution, and green infrastructure started looking at the more of the complete hydrologic cycle, or that was the intent. I'm not going to pretend that anybody had any idea really how that worked, other than you put water in and soak it into the ground at the time when we started building these. I also noticed that in 1993, they didn't have any underdrains under their original design. They added them later. I have one underdrain out of about 20 rain gardens on our campus. We don't really like them very much. So then I actually did my master's thesis in about 1980, looking at how ineffective detention basins were on a watershed basis as you start moving downstream. And I'm very good at hiring smart, hardworking people, so I don't have to work that hard. Clay Emerson was a master's student at the time at Drexel, and Drexel called me up and said, "We don't have anybody in stormwater at Drexel, can I help?" So I joined his committee, and he actually, as part of his master's, went out and surveyed 111 detention basins. That's a lot of work, and basically modeled the site for 2 inches of rainfall on some different rain gauges they put out to get a characteristic of the rainfall patterns. And he found for 2 inches of rain, these basins really did nothing to reduce peak flow. And they shouldn't. They weren't designed for 2 inches of rain. They were designed for 3.5 to 4 inches. And all of them had low flow channels. So we didn't want to get the water wet, the grass wet or anything during these smaller rainstorm events. So they might be working at that basin right downstream for that design storm, but on a watershed basis was not a great solution. So I hired him immediately and worked, and he became our first PhD in the area in stormwater. At the same time, we started working again. I'm going to go back to that National Academy study. This, to me, shows the problem. If you look on the left, we got a more of a rural or forested stream. On the right is an urban stream. It's not the fact that the 2-year storm is bigger. It's every storm is bigger. Whether it's a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, you have the amplification by the urban environment of all these storms make it very clear what some of our issues we have to deal with. And at the same time, I went through and we were trying to take a look. I was working with our Pennsylvania DEP, what this meant now, looking at more of the hydrologic cycle. So I did a simple plot of using 50 or 60 years of rainfall, on the daily rainfall, and plotting them on a mass curve. And very easily, you can see that we're basically, if I have about 1 inch of capture, 45% of my hydrologic cycle in volume is less than that. If I start adding the inch for the bigger storms, I'm up to close to 80%. Philadelphia now uses 1.5 inches of capture for the combined sewer overflow. So it really shows how impactful those small storms were and the volumes for the water quality and the aspects and the recharge and all of that were completely missing with our detention-based approach. And a good example of that is I looked at the 2-year storm is about in here, what I'm getting, about 5% of the hydrologic cycle, ignoring the other 90%. So really started changing our approach to stormwater. And some people, very smart people like Tom Schuler, started coming up with new approaches. He said, maybe we should do this. We'll take a look and have one target for water quality and groundwater recharge, have another target a little bit more for geomorphology, then getting into maybe the peak flows and the flooding flows as well. So break the problem down in your design and your approach to some of the different approaches that we want to take a look at. And Pennsylvania kind of did this. I was on one of the committees. We argued about this for about a year, and we ended up coming up with that for Pennsylvania, the water quality and the water quantity for the 2-year storm has to be the same pre and post construction. I should say for all storms up to the 2-year storm have to be the same pre and post construction. That's a pretty heavy amount of water. It's like 3.5 inches of rain. But that's not just for water quality, it's more for geomorphology. I think Pennsylvania has more streams per land area than anywhere else in the country. And so basically we had a lot of problems with geomorphology and streams. So the 2-year storm was picked not just for water quality, but also for the geomorphology. And then, of course, we can't get away from the 2, 10, 50, and 100-year, 24-hour peak flow designs as well. So that's also brought in here. So that was a big change for the state. And so, since I have to put a little Prince party like it's 1999, All right, no sense of humor. But basically, looking at it, we had a lot of new tools. So we're using now TR55 still, the Type 2 rainfall distribution still, but we had computers so we could do some routing. The rain gardens were introduced in the 90s. At first, the ratio of 1 to 5 was recommended, which is the impervious footprint to the size of the bowl or the surface area of the rain garden. No more than 6 inches deep. I think that says up to 80% compost, which is horrible. Don't do that. We need at least a ½ inch an hour to build without an underdrain in Pennsylvania. They did not want to build infiltration until you had at least a ½ inch an hour. They had a static designs, and there are a lot of places still use this, where you look at the results of this site by looking at the volume of the bowl and the volume of the void space. And that's it for the static design. And so we had questions. Is it dependable? What happens to back-to-back storms? I love the question one time I had, what happens if you have a back-to-back 100-year storm? I said, go to high ground. I mean, it's not a 100-year storm probability. How to build these, how to maintain these, how does infiltration, evapotranspiration work? What happens in winter? Why use soil? Rock is a bigger void space. A lot of questions. So what have we learned? Well, we built a lot of places at Villanova with the help of the state and some other funds and the university itself. So we have rain gardens and wetlands and porous pavements and green roofs and a lot of different sites throughout the years. And the 2003 rain garden at the top, I called it bioinfiltration. We're going to talk about a lot during this particular talk. And I apologize to those of you who heard me before, because I always bring this site up because it's a great site. So, rain garden 2001, we violated everything in the state manual, but the state manual hadn't been written yet, so I could do that. So basically, we made it a bigger impervious surface, made it deeper, like 18 inches deep, used a bigger footprint, it's bigger impervious surface. We just mixed sand and concrete sand and the native soil together is all we did. Put some mulch in and planted it. No underdrain, no liner, no gravel, none of that stuff. The one thing we did right was build it right. You notice the backhoe is working from the side, not from the bottom, so there's no compaction of that surface. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this site, when it fills up here, wrong one again, keep on hitting that. When it fills up, basically all of a sudden then water goes over a weir and bypasses the site. So when it's full and you have a hurricane, you're never going to have, it's never had any erosive motion over the surface. It's never had a sediment load coming from pervious area that eroded. And I think it's one of the reasons it's successful. And I can prove it's successful. We have been monitoring since 2003. We built it in 2001, so 25 years later, it has the same basic infiltration rate as we had when we first built it. Our maintenance program is very complex. We go in once a year, cut down all the grasses and rake it out, and that's it. So basically, I think we can say it's dependable if you build it right and don't neglect it. We also started working with some of your previous speakers, Alan Davis and Bill Hunt, and we worked together on one grant, and we looked at what we called the hockey stick approach. As a Flyers fan, sorry about the Minnesota, basically you like the hockey stick approach. And what I can say is that approach is the blade here is all the void space and the bowl's volume. And it very rarely had any outflows during events that were less than that volume. And the ones they were, in the wintertime, you have snow here, we have snow Philadelphia too. That basically I've seen piles of snow about 15 feet on top of the rain garden. Very hard to do a water balance when you have that along the way. But the other thing that was interesting is when we look at this basically a static design, it should be operating along that long handle. So once it's filled up, you should not get any more removals, right? And what we're finding out storm after storm after storm, we're exceeding our design expectations on this site. And then we looked at our treatment train. We were doing the same thing. We had a Superstorm Sandy. It got rid of like 4 or 5 inches of rain on a site designed for 1 inch. So we've seen this exceeded performance on 20 different sites, but Andy just wouldn't give me the time to show them all to you. And then we also not just worked at Villanova, we've done some work in Philadelphia through the EPA. And we looked at one of their infiltration trenches. They don't have a lot of space in the 17th century city. So a lot of times they build infiltration trenches under the sidewalk with some tree trenches. And basically the water comes down, comes in, and once again, when it's full, it bypassed. And this one was built that when you have about 2 inches of rain, it should be up here. it never filled up more than half full over 30 months of looking at it, including a lot of storms that were greater than the design storm. So obviously, the static approach, you're building it twice as big as you need to. And that extra space, the water can't even get in by the hydraulics, so it's a complete waste of time and money. As part of a city engineer, I think I would be much more interested in building two using that, looking at the infiltration as part of it, and get a lot more effectiveness for my particular sites. And the last one I want to show you of this type of information is one we did near the Philadelphia Zoo with the Philadelphia Water Department. And basically a little difference. They had one swale, they had a rain garden, grass swale, rain garden, no under drains. They did have a rock bed to the side. It was supposed to go underneath, but they ran into utility, so they had to put it to the side. And I actually like that better because you're expanding your infiltration footprint. So you should be getting more performance by expanding that infiltration footprint. And the nice thing about working with the city, they can turn on all the fire hydrants so I can check them out. Use the John Gulliver approach, filling up these things with the fire from the fire hydrants. And here is one storm, and I have tons of them I could show you. But we filled it up with the fire hydrant. Then thanks to the Father Peter, I think, or Father President, we got an inch of rain overnight to help us, which was kind of unplanned. And the next day we went back and filled it up a second time. So in less than 48 hours, it got rid of 6 inches of runoff volume. And it was designed for 1.5 inches for the static approach. I think we finally convinced the water department to start using a more dynamic approach when we started looking at these. The other thing that was interesting is the blue line is the pond. The black line is the rock bed. You can see that line across where the rock bed is full. And it was interesting, we saw water moving to the rock bed before it overflowed into a pipe that was connected to the rock bed. But the other thing that was really interesting was the second it stops raining, or the second the water's stopping coming in, you start having recovery of your system. Most rainstorm events are not a peak flow. They're a little peak here, a little peak here. In between those peaks, on every site we look at, we start seeing recovery of that system. Which is pretty outstanding about expanding the capacity of these systems. And again, you can even see it. You can even see it when you take a look at these two little blips from the rain overnight and the next day. So the second it starts, stops raining, or the water stops coming in, or the water is coming in is less than the ability of the system to infiltrate, you're basically getting a recovery for the next storm, which means you really don't have to worry about back-to-back storms because these systems actually recover very quickly as we move along. We also found on our site we had swales, a long linear swale. That even works better because you have a large infiltration footprint for those type of sites. It's much better to have a large footprint and very shallow than have anything deep and narrow together as they move along. All right. So from all these studies, and a lot of studies you haven't seen, we basically came up with what we called evolution of infiltration, that we want to use the vadose zone, the soil physics, as part of our design of our rain gardens. And that's easily, SWIM has most of that in there. Recarga, a lot of models out there, you can do that and do that soil physics. And basically, the other thing that was kind of interesting to me is to increase your saturated hydraulic conductivity. Freeze thaw, you got that, right? Plant roots, macropores, all that actually increase or recover your saturated hydraulic conductivity. What decreases it, we have control over. Stomping, bad construction, poor soils, poor media. And any site I've ever seen that's been built right, you don't have a problem with long-term performance. The ones, we have 2 at Villanova that did not work. One, we built it was over an old parking lot. So once we discovered it by filling it up with water, just put a few chimneys in of sand, works fine. The other, concrete sand, got mixed in with the media, and that sealed it immediately. So that's a nice little pond. But 1 out of 15 or 16, and that was a construction error. 1 out of 15, 16 is pretty good. We also should not forget about evapotranspiration. All right, how much evapotranspiration do you get during a storm event? Not much. But after the storm event, it's very critical at recovering capacity for the next storm. It's also if you have that ET, you have the plants, you're also regaining root pathways for the infiltration, maintaining the sites. So this was just a little example of looking how powerful this can be. On the right is a green roof we built at Villanova a long time ago, and basically it had an underdrain and did pretty good. That blue is a mass curve of the rainfall that came in for that 9-month period, and the pink is the outflow through that underdrain. We also built a little weighing lysimeter on the roof to measure the depth of water, the way that water in the soil, to try to understand it a little bit better. And on that one, you can see the blue is what the same rainfall accumulated mass. The green is what left by evapotranspiration, and the difference between the two is what you would consider would be your overflow, which is very minuscule. So we found not putting an underdrain under a green roof increased its performance by about 30 or 40%, which is kind of amazing. And this shows how strong those plants are at removing those particular, and we can translate that to rain gardens or bioswales and all those sites as well, which we have done. All right, other question I brought up was, what happens in major events? Now, this is a 200-year, 12-hour storm, definitely not a little more than 1 inch that this was designed for. And again, it's got some pretty heavy peaks, but there are periods of recovery between those peaks. And our site got rid of, designed for about a 1 inch, and this extreme high-intensity event got rid of about almost 3 inches of rain, almost 3 times what it was designed for on this site. So that's, and we see that in multiple. Superstorm Sandy was 3 days of rain, very steady. So we also had 3 days of infiltration. That's a particular storm. So it's we see that a little bit more when we're looking at these projects. And it's nice when you have 23 years of data. You can go through and do mass curves and try to figure out where everything goes. And so this is our looking at their water cycles. And the key takeaways from this particular site, I would say, is 54% of the inflow to this rain garden is removed by infiltration, and 20% by evapotranspiration after the storm. So one of the problems everybody was thinking that all that water disappears is going down into your groundwater. It is not. A big percentage of that is actually going into evapotranspiration from the soil after the storm event. So if you're doing a mass loading with water quality, that's a very important concept to remember, which we are trying to do the same thing now for water quality data, looking at the same type of cycle as this one is. So what have we learned? Well, proof of concept, I think we got that, works pretty good. Back-to-back storms, I don't really worry about it. It doesn't occur, and when it does occur, it's not enough significance to make any difference in my results. Infiltration and evapotranspiration are critically important, and I get to the point where I see some of these sites are built with so much sand that the plants struggle, and they're not going to work as well about maintaining your infiltration pathways. I'd rather have a little more fines in there and make these plants happy. Landscape architects will probably like that statement. If I go down, what I have in process, water quality, we're still working on that. Longevity, maintenance, got a good track record. Still have a little more to do. Climate change, we'll talk about. Extreme storms, I'll talk about that a little bit more. All right, I don't like design storms. They've been stuck with me since 1978. We got to do something better. And what I mean by that is how we do a design storm. So this is hurricane, that superstorm Isaias I mentioned. If I look at the statistics, there's the 5-minute peak, there's the 15-minute peak, there's the 30-minute peak, and there's the 60-minute peak. In our IDF statistics, those are all smashed together into one location in one particular storm in the statistics. If I go through now and look, basically, this is what I normally see on a 2-year storm. Is very distributed rainfall all over the place. It does not have that steep peak in the center. Those are both the same volumes. And that same very large peak in the center will prejudice your design to rock beds versus the green infrastructure that takes a little bit of a time. And we just don't see that high intensity center point. And there's a 25-year storm and a 2-year storm, and I can show you like 50 of them. Sometimes I think we're taking the thunderstorm 5-minute period and putting it in the middle of a big a warm front or cold front or cyclone type rainfall event where you don't have those high intensities. And that prejudices our design. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. McPherson, I have no idea who he is. In 1958, I was only 2. John was about 8. Basically come through and talked about this as unrelated values from a variety of storms, which are for a rare occurrence than indicated. Yen and Tang basically said design storm is to be used for the purpose of design of drainage facilities based on catastrophic failure. I don't consider a rain garden overflowing catastrophic failure. Basically, the Office of Research in 2006, which we used to have an Office of Research, talked about the continuous simulation over multiple years would be a much more superior way of looking at these smaller storms and water quality aspects. So we're trying to do that. Since the Pennsylvania, my former student convinced me to help write the new Pennsylvania Stormwater Manual. I should have flunked her. But basically, we're trying to put in some of these concepts now. So we're allowing the use of continuous simulation. So here's an example site just to show you how it works. We're using SWIM. There's a lot of models you could use for this. And it's a fairly low, 0.2 inches per hour, a low sea soil saturated hydraulic conductivity. We're running 15 years of rainfall data through this site in 1 minute increments. And luckily, the state law, they wrote it, says the 2-year storm has to be the same before and after. It does not say the 2-year rainfall. So I'm using the 2-year runoff. So basically what we're doing is we're running the model for 15 years for 1 minute data, which is very simple to get these days, running it through, taking the worst 24-hour period in each storm, sorting them, and the middle one is the 2-year storm. And basically we're advocating this. Now you can still do it the old way if you want a bigger site that's less effective. But we're figuring out this will also give you a lot more impetus in looking at good infiltration sites on your property so it'd be perform better as well as a designer. And so that's an example design. And one of the things that was very interesting is, and we've done this for all different soil types, you just get a little bigger or a little smaller basin based on your soil type. And we looked at the flow duration curves, and you don't have to read this mess of lines. The flow duration curves with this approach were equal or less than the pre-construction. So the geomorphology up to the 2-year storm was pretty much assured because of the amount of hours you were subject to the erosive qualities would be the same as pre-construction. And we thought that was pretty cool. Not part of the state regulations, but it's a good way of expressing how well it worked. And in fact, it worked better than just the 2-year. It probably went up to the 5 and 10-year in a lot of cases as well, but I can't require that for the state. Okay, we finished that. And basically, now we said, all right, we're doing the 2-year storm by a continuous simulation. We can't ask the consultants to go back to a design storm for peak flow design. So we borrowed something from Switzerland in Zurich, where they just have like 5 storms and run everything through. But instead, we decided to try a storm of record design. So what you have to do is pick a storm in your record that's greater than between the median NOAA 14 and the 90% confidence interval for a 24-hour period for each one of these events, and design your detention basin to meet that value. And so then we went through it pretty much, and it's kind of sad. In Pennsylvania, we were able to find the 2, the 5, the 10, the 25, and the 100-year storm all in the last 15 years. All right. We couldn't find the 50-year storm. We had to go back 20 years to find a 50-year storm. And so each one of these, you notice it's not really the 2-year, it's not really the IDF design curve. There's spaces in there and breaks in there. And so then we basically did the design. Now this is assuming I've already also done a water quality volume design, getting rid of that first, the difference of the 2-year storm. So that's reducing my peak flow requirements as well. And basically for this particular site, it got 25% smaller for the detention basin and a ½ a foot shorter. So is that significant? Well, if we're asking developers to develop 2 instead of 1 site, you know, you want to basically, we're trying to take a look at what is good for the homeowner and life cycle analysis and cost and things like that as well. So you can make it comes up with a little smaller site. And so Randy is probably going to ask me there, isn't smaller less protective? I don't think so. Sorry about that. I forgot. I had to get rid of all these slides from Andy. He wouldn't give me the whole hour. But one thing we found was that the design storm pre-construction peak is much higher than anything using these storms of record. It really accentuates that pre-construction peak, so you're allowed to put out more than you would expect out of a natural system. So the pre-construction peak in the design storm is accentuated. Now, the good news is It probably doesn't make any difference because you're never going to have that design storm because it doesn't really happen that way. But so we basically felt that this was a very effective design. And this is still under review and still under revision from the 6,423 public comments. One thing we're trying to put in incentives into our manual is to look at diversion. And the idea is our rain garden has worked at Villanova for 25 years. It's a pretty good example, right? And basically what we're looking at is we understood that during hurricanes, we never have any erosive flows, never have the big sediment loads coming off the grass during those larger storms. And so basically what we have, this is a diagram from that site, it's basically just a little water comes in from two inlets. There's a V-notch weir that pushes the water into the rain garden. When the rain garden is full, that stops it out and it goes out into a detention basin. And we think that is a very good design for doing with the water quality and the peak flow, especially for the homeowner thinking of life cycle designs over the cost of these particular systems. And have we done it before? Sure. This is one from Alan Davis, the University of Maryland. It just did a curb cut, built a little rain garden in the median strip. When that's full, it pops into the out right next to it. The only problem you have to do is make sure that you have enough slope to get the water in. Sometimes that doesn't happen. And does that look familiar to anybody? Burnsville? I visited in 2006. I would like to see some current pictures and see how well they're doing. I like the design, but when that's full, water is just going to go back into the peak flow. So that's a good example of a diversion design as well. So thank you for giving me some examples I could use in Philadelphia. A little bit off the line. I got a few minutes left. I think I'm going to be almost on time, Andy. It'll never happen again. But we also been working on I-95 in Pennsylvania and going through Philadelphia. They have to meet the combined sewer requirements of the city. And they're building hundreds of rain gardens. So it's a great avenue for research. And we're doing a lot of things. So for example, one thing we're finding is, they have a lot of designs where they have this one inlet going to this one rain garden, this one inlet goes in the one rain garden, one inlet going to one rain garden. And guess what? Looking at the flows coming in, nowhere near what the engineer expected. Some of them are higher, some of them are lower. Different storms, there are different percentages, what goes into one versus what goes into the other. It's an elevated highway with the inlets designed for a 25-year storm. I'm not sure how the 100-year storm knows to get to that rain garden. They've now changed their recommendations based on our research, so they have to look at that now. I just want to put them a little hole in the sound wall so when it overflowed, it would just pop in, but structural engineers don't like me. So basically we're looking at like this other site they have a long swale, and basically we can take a look at multiple inlets going into one swale, so if one's a little higher, one's a little lower, it's okay. We're still going to manage that. Or you saw the one of the Philadelphia Zoo that had two inlets going into two rain gardens. So if one gets a little clogged, we have another one. We also found some of the inlets were, because of the edge of the inlet, were 6 inches away from the sound wall. It's amazing how much water bypassed for the smaller storms that never went to the rain gardens because of that. So we're fixing that, and the nice thing is being able to have a laboratory and the field research combined to try to take a look at some of these issues. Construction errors, oh my goodness. Filling up, using the John Gulliver approach and turning on that hydrant and filling up that rain garden is the best construction inspection you can find. You can find if your weirs are at the right size. Leaks, every concrete inlet I've seen leaks. If they don't put the mastic around or whatever between the two different parts, it'll leak into sieves. And some people love under drains, so these sites have under drains that are supposed to be capped and there for emergencies. Well, they drill an 8-inch hole and put a 6-inch pipe into it, and there's a 2-inch band around it that leaks like a sieve. It kind of destroys the whole purpose of getting the water out and removing it. So basically, we found a lot of things like that. The nice thing is it's all correctable if you find them. And basically, putting water on the road and seeing how it goes into the pipes, filling up the rain gardens and checking the levels is a great inspection tool. And so we've recommended that, and Villanova is now doing that in all our designs, and we've found problems and fixed them before they become our problem forever. Variations in infiltration capacity. This is still a work in progress. We are finding that the sediment coming off the highway is very granular. And by accident, the media design and sediment and the particle size distribution to that coming off the runway is the same as what is used for dams for filters for the water moving through the dam. So theoretically, it should never clog. It could get deep, but not clog. because of the granular nature. And we've got a few papers out. We're doing a lot of research on that right now. Our geotechnical engineers are wondering why we're capturing all the sediment and all the fines go past in stormwater management basins when the fines are what cause the clogging. They're saying it's actually better just to let the sediments go than dig them out every once in a while. Still too early, but we're doing a lot of research on that right now. Innovations in design, I'll show you one I really like. Of course, Philadelphia has a different term. It's stormwater management practices. I use stormwater control measures. You use B&Bs. China uses sponge city. England uses scuds. It's very confusing. But we found one site and it failed. We have all sorts of pictures of construction equipment parked at the bottom of the swale. They made it too steep on the side, so all the mulch came down to the center. When you have cattails, is that you? No, I thought so. I thought that might be you. There's, you can tell, Rebecca, you can stand up, you can see how tall the cattails are. And so basically it was like, this is obviously built wrong. So we had a lot of people working on, from the geotechnical and Virginia Smith and Kristen Sample Lord, looking at what to do with this situation. Let's turn this into a learning exercise. How to figure out what's wrong, what's working, and go through what the rehabilitation is. And so we did that, and it's now working very nicely. And we try to do different design. Water comes out of the elevated highway, comes onto basically a concrete pad with no rocks, which I learned from you guys and seeing some of your stormwater sites, so I can get a coal shovel and dig it out very easily. Takes a right-hand turn, goes through 2 steps, then into the bottom of a larger infiltration basin. What's very interesting on this particular site is now we're learning, we get a lot of sediment, it's amazing off I-95, but all the floatables, all the trash are there, so it's easy to come and pick it up. Maintenance, get a weed whacker, go up those steps. It's not very hard, it's just grasses. The first ½ inch of rain does not go past that first step so far. The second ½ inch of step doesn't go past that second step. So if I think about it, if I have 11 storms greater than an inch, 11 storms of an inch, I'm probably only have 8 or 10 storms actually get past that into the rest of the basin. That should last forever. We are looking at your former compadres are now still looking at the soil sediment and looking at, we don't see any change in infiltration rate, but it's only been 2 years now. But this is, we're really trying to study this and learn more about it. And you know, if you did that well enough, maybe you can use that bottom part as a detention and not even call it an infiltration. So we like some of these designs, and we think we have a lot of things we can learn. And just some pictures of it. You can see the sediment building up, and you can see the grasses as it drops down. I think we built it a little too expensive, but this was the first one. PennDOT didn't know what to do. So anyway, almost done, Andy. So what do I think we need to do now? First of all, we need to take stormwater management seriously. I'm tired of going to sites that are built wrong and they blame it on green infrastructure. I'm just, get a life. We know how to build these things. It's time, Don't let contractors get away with a poor construction job. There's a lot of contractors who do a great job. We need to give them the money instead. We need to take the design seriously. Get the water to the site. I mean, you're not going to always pipe the 100-year storm, but you should know where it's going, right? We need to get the water to the site and understand that the collection system is not an exact number. So maybe we should not have only one pipe going into one rain garden. Maybe we should have 2 or 3 going into a rain garden to account for that. Volume and water quality design I think continuous simulation is the way to go, and use a dynamic strategy. By dynamic, I mean include the soil physics, the vadose zone, the wilting point, the field capacity on that, and we know how to do that. That's pretty easy to do. We need to protect the infiltration surfaces, design the dual systems, as I said. Why would I design a site for 1 inch to have the 100-year storm going through? It makes no sense to me. Maybe that's why I'm no longer a consultant. Designed to aid the trash and sediment capture and removal. We should make it so it's easy to do this, because this is the biggest expense we're going to have over the lifetime of these structures. Designed for the resilience. Climate is going to be variable. Changing inlets, infiltration rates are never constant. Understand the land use and contributing water quality pollutants. Subdivision is a lot different than a highway or a shopping mall. So I'm hoping eventually we'll have a little more understanding, and so we can maybe pick a different media based upon the particle size distribution from these different watersheds coming in. Next generation will work on that, and we need to embrace source control. What I still want to know is how to integrate the volume and peak rate to support flood risk mitigation. I don't know how the best to do that. I don't know if putting detention basins everywhere really solves a lot of our problems. And we've been doing it since the 70s. I don't see it's made a big difference. During some superstorm, Ida came through our area, and it was funny to see all the rain gardens, the detention basins full of water. It was a bright sunny day because the flood is coming down hours later past them, and they did absolutely no good. Water quality strategies that consider the land use, subsequent pollutants, and overall hydrologic cycle. Is the pollutant challenge to us the same if I put it through infiltration, throw it through an under drain, or it goes down the street, or just gets thrown up on the snow? We had the need to take a whole life cycle look at this. I've had a lot of people scared of salts in rain gardens. Well, how about all the salts everywhere else? I mean, this is a picture from 2 days ago in Philadelphia. This is on a grass strip below a Staples. There's probably a lot of salts in there, and that's all melts and going to go right into the ground. We actually see, we're looking at salts in our rain garden, and so far the solution to pollution is dilution. We actually see less milligrams per liter under the rain gardens, but by a mass it'll be a lot more. And downstream, we see less than upstream because of the water coming through the rain garden. Not sure what all that means yet, so we're still doing a lot of research on that and looking at other water quality aspects. And basically, we're also collecting all this pollutant runoff in a certain location. That's an opportunity for treatment. All right, so maybe we can put in the iron fillings from the tires, or maybe we can take a look if it's a gas station, look at PFAS, or what are the sources of pollutant, and use that in the media. But then that also means we have to have a maintenance approach that allows us that maybe every 10 years we remove 6 inches of media and basically restore help the infiltration, get the volume back, and also have more places for the pollutants to hit. We don't have that worked out, and we need to figure that out. And will we ever get seriously about salt? Those are the steps into my brand new engineering building, and you can see the pile. It's hard to see the piles of salts there. I mean, we don't take salt seriously. We throw tons of down everywhere. We need to start taking that seriously if that is an issue we want to address. And almost my last one, we do SCMs for new construction for thousands of legacy sites, and we also have good community groups and other programs to start restoring other impervious surfaces. Philadelphia has a 30-year CSO plan. People are upset after 5 years, after building 440 GSI in Philadelphia, that it's not seeing more of an impact on the combined sewer overflows. We spent 300 years building impervious surface. You're not going to correct that in 5 years by just looking in the new construction and the rebuilt areas. And so it takes patience, but we got to continue down that road. On climate change, I need more than just an increased IDF curve. I know they're supposed to be more compressed. So I know in Philadelphia they're saying we should have we have 4 to 6 2-inch storms, or maybe we'll have 6 to 8. And that's going to happen probably at times when it was empty. So our first model, you don't see a need to make them a lot bigger for that. Now, it's different than a hurricane, obviously, and things like that. But having just these multipliers that multiply my yearly rainfall by 1.2 doesn't help us. We need to get more data from NOAA and things like that. And we've been talking with them through the American Society of Civil Engineers. And finally, I want to continue our revolutionary history, right? George wants to continue the green infrastructure, time to battle climate change. Ben Franklin thinks dynamic design is right. John Adams still likes the modified rational method. All right, so anyway, I want to thank all the funders for a lot of different parts of our projects. We love their support, and we're continuing the research at Villanova, and mostly all our students. They're an amazing group that we have from all over the world, and there's an amazing group that we enjoy. And by the way, we have a Stormwater Symposium. Our next one is in October 26th, and there'll be a call for presenters out there. So come on down. You can visit Independence Hall, the Liberty Bell, and other things like that. So, and at that point, I'm good.
So, before we ask questions, I have a question.
Okay.
Usually I don't do this, but I like to this time. Philadelphia is trying to do as much as it can with infiltration to avoid going underground and spending a lot of money building a storage facility underground. Do you think that they're going to get there?
25 years, we'll see. They made a lot of progress. It's not just green, they're also doing gray. The problem is we have hundreds of miles of combined sewers. There's no way you could build an underground facility big enough. We don't, I think Boston had some old subway tunnels they used. We don't have that. It would be impossible literally to do that. I have some slides, which I had to remove for time, but basically showed Philadelphia had hundreds of underground rivers that were all bricked over. It was all public health. They're trying to keep the disease away from the public. So it's impossible for them to do. I do like the green approach with the gray approach. I think they will get there, but it's going to take a lot of battles with people who are not going to look for the long-term basis. We had a mayor of Philadelphia who said that mayors don't care about green infrastructure. But if you're creating jobs, you're creating a better environment, you have a better air quality of the city, it's more attractive, that's what they want. So I thought that was a pretty good quote. I hope they do like water quality too.
Okay, do we have any questions from inside the House? For
I
Rob.
was told to be prepared. Randy, why am I not surprised?
I don't know which question to ask, that's the challenge. And as someone who frequently speaks as fast as I can to get as much information as possible into the limited time I'm given, you really worked that well. That was
I
a
was
lot.
trying to slow down, but I kept on making my slide deck smaller and smaller and smaller.
So the question I want to ask, I think, is what do you think about Atlas 15?
I can't wait for it comes out.
Coming up. And unless the Trump folks manage to kill it again, it still includes volume 2, which is climate change projections.
Right.
And how would you incorporate that into continuous simulation?
Well, right now what we do is basically, if you're not doing continuous simulation, or using the upper 90% confidence interval for NOAA 14. And we're doing that same type of, so in SWIM, you can just use a SWIM-CAT, which is no longer on the EPA's website, but we still have copies of it. You can go through and you bump it up a little bit. I'm very anxious to see NOAA 15 come out. Volume 1 is going to be updates to the data for what we have now. We know that's coming out, I think. Volume 2, based upon the climate change projections, hopefully it will come out. But I don't know. I mean, basically what I'd love to do would be taking a 15-year record of continuous simulation, and if I can manipulate that to project what it would look like in the future, I think that would be the way to go. But it's not just additive like we're doing now. That's what we're trying to do now. It will also be squishing and making some of these storm events more intense.
Right.
Good question.
Okay, do we have a question from online?
If such a large percentage of water is removed via evapotranspiration, are contaminants concentrated into the infiltrated remaining water?
Well, you have to do the mass. That's why we like the mass balance approach and not the rate approach, because of that. But on the other hand, let's put it this way. Well, they're not being removed by evapotranspiration, I don't think. That's obviously the case. But if I'm looking at milligrams per liter of a rate, I should multiply it by the correct volume that's going to be appropriated into it. So the answer is probably. I mean, it's actually what the natural process would be. I would not expect evapotranspiration to remove pollutants, but I've never studied that, so I don't know.
Yes, we have a question from in-house.
Hi, Brett Emmons from EOR. So I was very intrigued by towards the end, you said trying to look at green infrastructure and its effects on flood control. We've had several instances where it certainly has an impact, but it also seems like we also come across a lot of people that just dismiss it and say that they're two different worlds. We do some work up in Canada as well, and there's a conference coming up, and I've seen that repeated several times where that's fine if you want to do green infrastructure, but it doesn't really matter in terms of flood control. And I guess personal experience, I think that's not true, but I'm curious, what direction are you thinking to attack that?
I do have some experience in flood control. I worked on Katrina in New Orleans for about 5 years and the causes of that. You're not going to reduce basically, you're not going to control a hurricane or a 100-year storm using a rain garden, but you can reduce some of what you do have to control. So if you are, and when we started doing this, we always keep the green and gray as two separate systems. Why not reduce the cost of the gray by the advantage of what we have with the green? It seems silly. I like using the green as the entranceway and for the gray as you move through. It just seems like you're trying to make it as expensive as possible. The big problem is, again, if I look at Philadelphia, look at thousands of acres, I can do green infrastructure in this one site and reduce the problem there, but I'm not doing it everywhere. So that's the scale is the kind of the issue. And I don't look at stormwater management as a flood control. I mean, we have zoning regulations, flood walls if you have to, don't build eye walls. Basically, there's a lot of evacuation plans. There's a lot of things we can do in flood control. Stormwater management can help, but it can't solve that. So it's, I agree and disagree, because I do think it can be very significant in reducing the problem that you have to deal with.
Okay, we'll finish with a question from online.
You can ask me later.
All right. I'm not sure I fully understand this question myself, but I'll try to relay the message as clearly as possible. As IDF estimates move towards a non-stationary approach, like the upcoming Atlas 15, I anticipate that it will be easier to modify design storm depths than a series of recorded events or continuous simulation. Given the many examples in the presentation preferring simulations of recorded events to a design storm approach, what role do you think recorded events or continuous simulations will play in designing for non-stationary future storms?
Non-stationary means, for those of you, climate change and increases of, that's what they're talking about, the non-stationarity of the statistics. I think the problem with the IDF curves is the patterns and the fact that you have natural recovery periods, which are not referenced it. I am hoping that we would come to a time where we can take this last 15 years of data and look and see what we think climate change will change that in 10 or 15 or 20 years and use that to design. I don't think we ever want to design for something that's going to be out of date in 10 years, right? We want to look at the future and protection of the, that's kind of our job, for civil engineers, our job is protection. So basically it's, I am hoping that that information can be used to inform for the stormwater area, to inform changing or pattern of rainfall we've seen recently and kind of project what that change is going to be. Of course, we also have designs of life safety structures and dams and things like that, major structures, and that the IDF curves will be very useful for that. That's what they were intended for safety factors, and just to make sure that nothing would ever be. Like, I would use that for New Orleans and the levees. I wouldn't use it for a rain garden. So I'm not sure if that answered it, but.
Okay. We'll take a 5-minute break. We'll come back with Andy Erickson and our panel of local experts to talk about green infrastructure. And let's thank Rob one more time.
Welcome back to the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. My name is Andy Erickson. I am honored and privileged to be able to moderate our panel discussion today. What I'm going to do is introduce our panelists, ask for their relation to the topic, and then we will be diving into your questions. So if you're in the room, just raise your hand. We'll get to you. If you're online, please use the Q&A function within Zoom. Those of you that are online can also upvote questions that you see there, and we will ask the most upvoted questions first. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome and introduce our panelists. Our first panelist on my right, your left, the far side of the table, is Jennifer Ehlert, who is Vice President and a Landscape Architect at Metro Bloom's Design+Build. Jennifer, from your perspective and experience, how do you relate to our topic today?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And is this okay? Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Great. No, I really appreciate Rob's presentation and really the research coming out of Villanova and places like SAFL. So our experience is really from the practitioner perspective. We both design, install, and then maintain green infrastructure and talk about it a lot and provide a lot of education. So that looks a little bit more like retrofit design. Wow.
That wasn't you, that was us. Keep going.
Yeah, retrofit design in a lot of our urban areas work really within the urban core of the Minneapolis kind of metro area. We do, I would say one of our main focuses is on maintenance of green infrastructure. So we have crews that help maintain a lot of the city's green infrastructure and other green infrastructure, mostly vegetated throughout the city. And then our bigger perspective, Metro Bloom's Design and Build is unique. We're owned by a nonprofit organization called Metro Bloom's. We recently revised our mission, so I have to read it because I don't have it memorized yet. We partner with communities to nurture and support thriving ecosystems, land, and water. And so the focus of that nonprofit organization is really to work with communities, primarily environmental justice communities, looking at green infrastructure, making sure that that's equitably available throughout our area. And we run a green workforce training program focused on environmental justice communities and really talking about environmental stewardship, green infrastructure, and environmental justice in those areas, so kind of building that capacity. Lastly, Metro Bloom's as a nonprofit runs the Blue Thumb program, which many people have heard of, and so Blue Thumb is providing that kind of educational resource about what is green infrastructure, which is such a technical term to just a regular person who's learning about this. So we might say green, rain gardens or clean water, just to really make that more accessible. So we really kind of dialed down a lot of the technical information that might be coming out of SAFL and Villanova and really try to be able to translate that so there's more education around what these sites can do, what rain gardens can do, and why that's valuable for our area. So it's a long answer, but we do a lot of different things.
That's great. No, I love it. Our second panelist is Joe Barten, who is a program management supervisor at Dakota County SWCD and an administrator for the Lower Mississippi River Watershed Management Organization. Joe, from your perspective and experience, how do you relate to the topic today?
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me. I want to go back in time a little bit. I feel like I can go all the way back to my youth, growing up, and I was doing landscaping. So, when I was 15 years old, I was installing rain gardens for a landscaping contractor. A little bit later, did that for a few years. I've also been in the big plow trucks, knocking over street signs at 3 a.m. and dumping salt all over our streets. So that perspective. Went to the University of Minnesota, worked underneath the landscape architect there. So we worked on, actually, I think I developed the first stormwater BMP maintenance guide for all the BMPs at that time on the U of M campus with land care. And then working for a watershed district, working on the regulatory side of stormwater management, and then now with Dakota County Soil and Water, kind of on the program side. But I guess now I'm on the program side. Prior to that, doing stormwater BMP design, working with cities and our partners and our watershed management organizations, finding grant funding, putting together designs for all different scales of BMPs. So we have programs that work with homeowners as well, educational programs where we work on small-scale rain gardens, homeowner rain gardens, and then we'll also help cities get grant funding, assist with design on any size of stormwater BMP or green infrastructure to the civil engineering level. So all different perspectives, I guess, in my work with both the Dakota County Soil and Water Conservation District and the Lower Mississippi River Watershed Management Organization, kind of have dual roles there.
That's wonderful, Joe. Thank you so much. And our next panelist is Liz Stout. Liz is the, I have to read it because if I mess it up, I'll mess it up. Liz is at the City of Minneapolis Public Works and is the Water Quality Division Manager, Supervisor, Director?
That works.
All of those?
Sure.
All right, Liz, from your perspective and experience, how do you relate to the topic today?
Sure. Thank you, Andy, and thanks everybody for being here today. I do work for the City of Minneapolis Public Works Surface Water and Sewers Division. I lead a team of incredible professionals, many of which are in the audience today. And we work really in that stormwater regulatory world. We have done everything. We manage our stormwater management ordinance for development, of which we have about 1,200 different properties with BMPs that we work with private property owners to manage those BMPs. We also have about 400 individual GSI basins that we've put in as part of linear projects just in the past 5 years. Personally, I was one of the main authors of our stormwater management ordinance that required GSI and stormwater management for our linear projects. So there's a lot of people that curse my name as our transportation engineers are putting together those plans. And we've found that oftentimes stormwater is the last thing that people look at, and it has to compete with all of the other, transit, bikeways, sidewalks, other green space needs, trees. So we've been really working to help develop at the very beginning design standards for how to fit that GSI into those linear corridors as during the planning level. Then during design, working out how do we develop plant palettes? How do we, again, work with our designers to help set some of those standards? My team is also now on the opposite end. We manage all of those, the maintenance of those 400 publicly owned GSI basins, mostly the vegetation piece. For those of you who've worked in public works, we're not great with plants. We're good with pipes, we're good with gray things, but plants is a new space for us. So that's a place where we're really trying to learn how to do better with maintenance. We've worked with Metro Bloom's workforce development. Do we have enough people in the workforce to do all of this work? How can we provide stipends for young people to get into this field? That's a space where we're also starting to develop work. So it's really from that planning end, developing standards, all the way through how do we maintain and then keep these in perpetuity.
That's wonderful, Liz. Thank you so much. We won't ask for Rob's relation to the topic.
I wonder why.
He used up all his time in the first hour. I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
Sorry.
We're going to dive in. I'm actually going to ask a question for the panel, and then we'll dive into the audience questions. And I'm going to use the first one I gave already. What's one of the biggest aha moments that you've had related to green infrastructure or working with communities or building awareness? What's one of the biggest aha moments from your career so far?
All right, I'll jump in first. We had some pretty high-profile lessons learned in Minneapolis. I had to write down KSTP, Rain Garden Project confuses, frustrates some South Minneapolis residents. Ooh, CARE 11, reboot needed for South Minneapolis rain gardens. There's a couple of others. I was interviewed for most of these. When things fail, especially in residential areas, it gets a lot of press, and you have to be willing to take that sometimes. And sometimes you mess things up, and what you have to do is you have to kind of acknowledge it. Yep, there was a mistake made. We're correcting it, and we're going to move forward. It can't stop you from pursuing, doing new things, and doing GSI. But you also then have to look at your public, and how are you selling this to the public? How are you talking about GSI? And it's not just for us as practitioners, professionals, but how are we bringing the public into this discussion? That was kind of eye-opening to me, because I know that this is a good thing, but I need to bring the public in. I need their support because we need their funding.
Others?
I'm going to go next just because it's so similar to what you were saying, Liz. I think that the biggest aha moment for me has really been in talking about what green infrastructure is, and honestly not using terms like green infrastructure, because I just don't think that's necessarily accessible. I think there's a high level of knowledge in this room around this topic, but making sure that the language that we're using is just appropriate for everyone to be able to understand that. Because I think in general, most people are really interested in clean water, right? And so that's something we can all get behind and all rally around. And so making sure that the way that we're talking about clean water is very, very clear to those of us who may not, be a technical researcher and be able to understand some of the graphs and charts today. So, and I think once we do that, then we have that public buy-in, and then we can start to talk about, what does it look like? And I know that some challenges the city deals with, challenges we deal with, and I deal with as a designer, especially in vegetated practices, and kind of how can we change the views around what those should or shouldn't look like, which I'm happy to talk about. I love to talk about plants, and that's kind of a particular area of interest for me. But I would just say, thinking about, generally speaking, talking about environmental stewardship and the opportunities for green infrastructure to contribute to that, and really tying that back to clean water, because we all love our water resources in Minnesota and use them in some way or another, and that's kind of a way to provide that touchstone for people to connect on why this is really important.
I would say, Liz, you're not the only one that kind of has those kind of rain gardens that may be causing issues, right? Minneapolis may have taken the heat for that, but I think we find those all over the metro. We certainly have our fair share of rain gardens that were installed with under drains. Our system used to be that we would have under drains, but then a valve. so that we could close it as much as possible or whenever possible to maximize infiltration. But I think that was my biggest aha moment, is just realizing what are some of the things we're doing that we need to rectify quickly. We need to find ways to go back and fix the issues that we have, and we need to find a new plan going forward. And just also a larger, giving grace to ourselves that we are all still learning what the best thing to do is, and we will make mistakes along the way. But we are still moving in the right direction. We didn't, it was probably 20 steps forward and maybe 1.5 steps back, right? It wasn't that far back. So we're still making good progress, even with small hiccups along the way.
Rob, you can add some aha moments if you'd like.
Okay. I think my major one was finding out that a small capture of rainfall was incredibly significant. It's like I get a half-inch of land in a retrofit, half-inch of water runoff into a small little retrofit site. It's amazing how much of the hydroelectric cycle you're addressing. I think that was my aha moment.
That's good. Well, let's dive into questions. Who has a question? Oh, we got to go to Ross.
Rob, I really appreciated your focusing on the positive and the overperformance of some of the practices based on how real rainfall acts. But as we look at our rules, we don't seem to have a preference for that evapotranspiration piece. We can meet our volume control requirements by putting it into the ground, and that's usually the bias when we start to bury things more underground. I've seen a lot of practices work too well. And the water starts spilling out in the neighbor's basement, and then they have to put a drain tile in and serve their own drainage needs. How do we start to really aggregate up to systems level performance with these things when there's just so much site variability and the standards don't really promote what we want?
I mean, part of it is we do have to respect that we have professional engineers who should be looking at some of those dangers, and they should be held accountable if they're not. Sometimes as a professional engineer, I don't really feel they take seriously the requirements, especially when somebody tells me the modified rational method conserves mass as a unit hydrograph. They have no idea what they're talking about. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's why, unfortunately, I think some of our legal, or at least in Pennsylvania, have promoted building in an underground system more than a green infrastructure system, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to emphasize the need for looking at, on a cost-effective basis, looking at better soils where you can build a rain garden and not do what you're talking about. I think a lot of this is we need to look at the complete life cycle cost and not just the cost of the construction. I think that is basically where we have to do the paradigm change to get there.
Other thoughts?
I'll try.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like with regulation, we sometimes go a little bit hard, and we maybe don't leave enough flexibility because each site is so different. And we do have this, wonderful resources in Minnesota. We have the Stormwater Manual, and I feel like we just need to continually move in the direction of flexibility, I think, and not get too rigid, because rigidity is going to mean, one size fits all.
Yep.
And we need to recognize there is no silver bullet. A rain garden does not belong in every situation, and that we need to do the right BMP for the right place. And yeah, maybe city, and that's going to be different for cities. That's going to be different for counties and different size cities. And yeah, every situation is different.
So keeping the bar high, but allowing flexibility to be able to solve that problem in multiple ways, right? Good. I think we had a number of online questions. Can we take an online question and we'll come back to the in-person audience?
We have a viewer wondering about the use of sand in bioretention. They would like to know about the risk of construction sand turning into a pseudo-concrete-like material that will impede infiltration, and are also wondering, how do you think we should think about soil amendments to support plant life? We see a lot of failed plantings in green infrastructure and municipalities saying that green infrastructure is unworkable, but is maybe that just a design issue?
You got all that, right?
Yeah, that's very, I mean, if you have so much sand it turns into concrete, you're putting way too much sand in these systems. We had, for a while, we had a lot of people putting a lot of sand in these systems and adding a little compost. And frankly, you need to have enough water for the landscape architects here between the wilting point and the field capacity for these plants to live, because that also increases your infiltration aspects of it. some of our best sites were the earlier ones because we used less sand. And then for a while we used more sand and the plants were more struggling. If I always look at it, if I see a lot of plants in there, I know it's doing pretty well. I'm not worried about sand turning into concrete because I'm not going to put that much in there.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, well, one of our goals in Minneapolis is to try and take a hard look at the BMPs we're putting in. We've been able to collaborate with the St. Anthony Falls Lab to do a lot of monitoring of BMPs, kind of trying for that adaptive management approach. How do we do better design? And I think it becomes, when you put more organics in to get that plant growth that you need, it becomes a bigger issue when you have those under drains. As an engineer, we always want to try and design that belt and suspenders so that nothing fails, but then your failure is in your water quality as it runs out. So then you get into, if it's true, if it's full infiltration, it's less of an issue. You want those plants, you know, full and healthy. So if you have an under drain, try and cap it. We've done some capping projects. Or if you have to put in a filter for whatever reason, whether that's, you know, contamination, karst, things like that, then you have to be a lot more conscious about using, again, more sand, less organic matter, and trying to have that balance then between having your plant growth, having that being more effective, but also not then exporting phosphorus because you put too much in. We haven't figured out exactly that balance yet, but that's something that we're working on internally.
I was just going to say, from our perspective, I think that you can kind of take a look at, you know, really examine the native soils before making an assumption that
Yes.
there is this need to bring
Definitely.
in, to excavate a large amount, which adds a lot of cost to a project, can be, you know, extremely cost prohibitive, to bring in a bioretention mix. I know there's been a lot of research done here about levels of compost, type of compost to kind of reduce that phosphorus export, which is great. And so I think maybe doing some initial design investigation to determine, you know, infiltration rates of those native soils, and the capacity to not have to always bring in that, you know, excessive sand. And then in rain gardens where we are using native soils, you know, the plant growth is great. We have great soils here to be able to support, you know, there's great organic matter to be able to support plant growth. And usually in those, many of the ones we've worked on aren't under drained, so that isn't an issue with the additional phosphorus runoff. I was going to say that I think that what is maybe, from my perspective, one of the most challenging factors to plant vegetation growth is really soil compaction in our urban areas. So a little less related to, you know, just removing the, you know, whatever 18 inches in order to be able to put in a bioretention mix, but really finding a way to scarify or loosen that soil and be able to utilize those native soils. And then once you can reduce that compaction, we found plant growth to be much more successful. But that's been a pretty major hindrance.
I agree with all of that. I will add a little bit. In all of our BMPs that we've installed, you know, we use wash sand, and even with a high sand percentage mix, never kind of experienced that turning into a, you know, concrete type mix or anything over time. Especially, if you have it vegetated, that's going to keep the soil, you know, from compacting, recompacting. I feel like we're all just trying to find this sweet spot, right? We're trying to balance all these things, and we want a rain garden that looks great, that the public will accept because it's got pretty flowers, and it's going to do all the things that it should be. It's going to maximize infiltration. It's going to pond as much water as possible and treat as much water as possible. So I feel like we've been moving in to different directions. You know, we've moved in the direction of more plant diversity and, you know, it looking very good for the public. We've been trying to give it more water and maybe deeper ponding depths over the last 10, 15 years for larger stormwater BMPs. So maybe we need to pull back a little bit and accept the limitations of some of these, if we're talking about rain gardens, some of these rain gardens and bioretention BMPs or biofiltration BMPs, that they can't necessarily do everything we want them to do in every situation. So then maybe that means we have to start considering more of a limited plant palette with plants that can really tolerate the limited amount of nutrients and still provide the benefits when in terms of infiltration and evapotranspiration. Maybe we need to, you know, look at shorter or smaller ponding depths and more dispersed BMPs throughout a site versus the cheaper option of kind of a larger one maybe at the bottom of the hill. So I think we kind of maybe have to go back to some of those 20 years ago, you know, low impact development techniques versus some of the directions that we maybe have been going in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I do know, prior to some of the changes in the Minnesota Stormwater Manual, a number of years ago, we had more basins failing, infiltration basins failing, when we had higher content of topsoil. And if that topsoil had more clay content in it.
Yep.
But in recent years, and again with changes in the Stormwater Manual, a lot of that guidance has shifted us away from those systems that can fail in that way. And if anybody isn't aware of the Minnesota Stormwater Manual, you can literally just Google Minnesota Stormwater Manual and you will find it. It's a wonderful resource with lots of information, a lot of details. I actually want to jump in on a little bit on and build on this question with this question. We've talked a lot about rain gardens, bioretention. We've talked about plants. Jennifer mentioned compaction. I love that, and scarifying the soil and making sure we get good infiltration. Can my panel expand on that and think about soil health in our pervious areas, beyond the rain gardens, beyond the constructed stormwater controls? How do we take some of these things we're talking about in bioretention that make them successful and translate that to our other green spaces in our urban landscapes? What can you say to that?
That's a tough one. There are people doing studies about soil restoration and plantings.
Okay.
I think it's still mixed. We are trying to encourage that if you're doing a plan to have at least 10% of your project in addressing stormwater, be like green roofs or buffers, and looking at the sheet flow going over systems. The soil restoration is a tough one. How do you do it without going back and recompacting over the past? I have not done research in that area, but it's one that we are encouraging people to decompact and to plant. I think the easiest thing is planting, frankly, and restoring the land use as much as you can. But it's I think we have a lot to learn on that particular area. Good. So when you figure it out, let me know, please.
Will do.
I was going to say the same thing. When you figure it out, let me know. We have kind of a unique challenge in Minneapolis in that we're fully developed, but the city also does not own our parks. There's a separate unit of government that owns the parks, so that even more greatly limits the kind of green space that we have to work with when thinking about soil health. I do know that a previous community that I worked for did allow for some of the stormwater management requirements to be met by doing that scarification, decompaction with compost amendment for new development. That was something that you could use to meet a stormwater management requirement. Also, the use of conservation easements around, existing prairie areas or existing, large growth tree areas that they wanted to conserve. So, looking beyond BMPs, and maybe there's an opportunity there for, again, incentivizing that through regulation to promote that with development and redevelopment. But yeah, I wish there was a good answer for that, especially in these really heavily urban environments.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, it is certainly different in different areas, right? You have a fully developed city. We have large areas of Dakota County, like Lakeville, where we have massive 100-acre greenfield development happening, where there's still, we'll through our landscaping for clean water program. We'll have a new homeowner in a brand new built house, and they want to put in a rain garden. And we will do a site visit, we'll check out the soil infiltration, and still to this day, I will find sod and less than an inch of topsoil then clay, right? Still in 2025, 2026. So I feel like, especially with new development, we have to do a better job of requiring topsoil, minimum requirements for topsoil. And it is no small feat when you require something to actually enforce it, right? So that's the other part, is having the political will and the funding to enforce these things, which I think is usually the difficult point. But, there's some cities that are doing it. Greg Thompson in the city of Eagan, they've incorporated, compost amendments into their code to require that for redevelopment or development projects with certain organic matter requirements. So it's possible, and I think places are moving in that direction. So that's another future topic, is for Greg to tell us how that's working, and especially on the enforcement side. How do you do that on a citywide scale? Those things that we know work, increasing the soil's ability to hold water, through organic matter. The last thing I would say is not usually something we ever reference, but, golf courses are pretty good at soaking up water. So how are golf courses managing their greens, their properties, through simple things like aeration, decompaction, incorporation of sand and compost, and the right soil mixes. We don't want to be spraying the way they do. or maybe not those same seed mixes that they're using, but what are some other ways that we can look to other industries that we might not normally see as opportunities?
Does that mean we need to do a lot of golfing to really inspect this?
Maybe,
Field
yeah.
detailed research. In-depth field research.
I guess I just want to say that it seems like there's not my field of study, but so much great research coming out about soil microorganisms. So I think like once we start to really understand that a little bit better, we have be working within our very urban area. We have so few like native soils in place. So we're really not looking at a native soil profile, and thinking about kind of reestablishing soil microorganisms in the site. And I want to kind of clarify something I said earlier about scarification to deal with decompaction. I'm not talking about tilling, which is really going to pulverize the soil and kind of break up any like soil fungal networks. So like that, like leave it chunky as a technical term, to make sure that we're keeping those soil microorganisms in sight. And then even Joe, sites like you're working with, it's unfortunate that today we know this about soil health, and yet still, topsoil is torn off. It's either, sold, maybe an inch is put back,
Right.
and then the sod. So kind of those practices of even in new builds, how we're handling soil health could stand to be improved quite a bit. So in my mind, what I was thinking about was, as that translates to soil health, is like really trying to reestablish those soil microorganism networks. We know that comes from organic matter and like relationships to plant roots, but loosening that soil, decompacting it, but not pulverizing it. I didn't want to put the wrong information out there about that.
Let's take an audience question. All right, right here.
Thanks. What roles do you see for smart stormwater technology in managing stormwater and things like adaptive water level management and control?
We've played around with them. We've had some funding from different firms, and so when we built our green roof, we captured runoff that is in excess of the capacity of the green roof and used it back for basically watering the green roof during dry periods and emptying the tank during big storms so we get a little more capture. And we were able to greatly increase the capacity of that green roof in removing the water. And the nice thing about that part of it is, if you're in downtown Philadelphia, you don't have a lot of green space, you could probably get a lot more bang for your buck for that green roof than you if you did not do that. And green roofs are not cheap, so it's probably very cost effective. We've done it in our stormwater wetland. We've looked at it from the standpoint of, if I hold water back, maybe I can get some more different treatment in different aspects of the wetlands, but that's a little bit fancier. It's probably a research area. Not too many people are going to do that. Obviously, you see a lot of people do it in existing detention bonds, trying to get some extra bang for the buck from those. I think it's definitely I don't think it's needed everywhere. I mean, it's a lot easier to put a rain garden in and not do any of the electronics, but it definitely has a role, especially where you have less space. I think it is the most, and retrofits, I think is the most probable place I would expect to see it. If you don't have a lot of space, you need to take advantage of other opportunities. So that's the way I would put it.
Yeah, we haven't implemented any yet, but the city of Minneapolis has a number of flood control ponds that we've put in just because our infrastructure, being 100 plus years old, is undersized. And we do have a lot of just neighborhood flooding. And these stormwater ponds were put in for that flood control. We're looking at retrofitting those because we don't have a lot of additional space to do water quality. That would be one of our goals, but then looking at, that's one option, to do those smart controls to provide that additional flood benefit, or at least not reduce it, while also looking at water quality. I know we do have an expert in the audience, Ross, but I think there's some definite opportunities here, and I'm really looking forward to exploring it, but I don't have any answers yet.
Other thoughts?
I don't have much experience with those, so not very helpful.
Well, I will say, I don't think I'm scooping too much. Stay tuned. We will have a seminar on smart systems and adaptive level controls. So keep an eye on the schedule and watch for those announcements later this year. Well, that was an in-person question. Let's take an online question.
Do you expect public works departments to continue to attempt to address GSI maintenance internally, or do you expect the trend to lean towards contracting that work out? If you expect internal staffing to be relied upon, what training do those teams need most?
I'm laughing because I'm like, Sean, stop. No. That's a tough one. Right now, we have trouble staffing at the service level for the infrastructure we have now, which is mostly gray. There's just limited people that are working in that field at, wanting to do those more manual jobs. That's just a reality. Right now, we're having to contract all of that out, but we're also finding that there's a limited pool there. So, trying to figure out how do you incentivize or build that workforce, whether that's, we've been able to build in stipends. If one of our contractors is proving that they are bringing in an early career professional, they can get a stipend to train those people in. We've also worked really closely with Metro Blooms on some workforce development pieces. I think it's ultimately going to be a combination of both, because you have to have that expertise in-house in order to even manage a contract externally. Yeah, it's tough. And as we get more and more green infrastructure, both in Minneapolis but also outside of it, it's going to become a more and more growing field, and we're going to need to figure out some of those workforce issues. And when there's a city, you only need people to worry about vegetation, maybe 6-7 months a year. What do you do with them the rest of the time? Do you have that full-time work, 12 months out of the year? And then is it fair to, only hire seasonals? I think those are all the questions that we're going to need to ask really long-term when looking at that workforce.
You really have to take a look at the whole thing as a system. Philadelphia's been doing that. One thing they've been looking at is training at-risk youth. Got a misdemeanor, got caught with a joint or something like that, and basically get into a program where you can basically train you for green infrastructure. So I think they're starting to do a lot more small contractors, small groups in different areas for some of the sites. I know PennDOT is trying to do that as well in the I-95 corridor right now. Unfortunately, I have to pick up the drug needles as well as other things you find in rain gardens. But they're basically looking at, that's a job. So mayors like that, you're creating jobs in the area.
Other thoughts?
I mean, we do both, right? So we are a contractor who maintains that green infrastructure, or a portion of it for the city, and then we also have our green workforce training program, because there needs to be more people being able to do that work. Which we may be, we're providing some competition for ourselves, and that's great. I think from the mission perspective of our nonprofit organization, the more people who are working in green infrastructure, who know what a rain garden is, know how to maintain that, the better, and ultimately the more successful our city will be. And then I think for us, just making sure that that extends to like the broader portions of our population. So making sure that we're working with like youth in environmental justice communities who are really interested in environmental stewardship, but trying to make those pathways into those careers and kind of working with the city in order to be able to continue those larger pathways. And it is challenging when you have seasonal work to ensure that you're employing people year-round. We have that challenge on our own crews. But have been able to, one of our we call it sustainable land care training, and one of the folks who has gone through our program is actually now our crew leader, and that's been a great success. And then we really ensure that anyone who has gone through that program at least gets an interview to meet with us when we start to hire every season. But those are seasonal positions, and ideally then those individuals can grow in their careers. But we all generally need some work year-round, right? So making sure that as they move into their careers, they have that basis of information, that basis of success, that, learning it to be able to take that into the next step. So there are definitely challenges there, and I think that we're not the city, but we do both of those things, both working to maintain those and then also training folks as well.
Good questions.
I'll add, in Dakota County, we're on our third generation green infrastructure stormwater BMP maintenance plan. So now I think this last one, We have around 120 BMPs around the county, and that through Dakota County Greenways and on Dakota County properties themselves. So just that small area, not countywide or citywide. And over the progression of the years, we've seen that it is really helpful to have kind of a snapshot in time, that you really have a more intense inspection period that allows you to prioritize maintenance on all these 100 BMPs, because you can't do it all every year. So that's really been our focus, is prioritization. And we think about, how visible is this BMP? Is it already functioning as it is? And so we're only actually, performing maintenance on 20 of them a year, and that's on a 5-year cycle. So it's kind of taking a step back, and, us at the Soil and Water Conservation District, we're essentially acting as a consultant for the county in that capacity. So I think it's going to be different everywhere, but you're going to have a combination of consultants, partnerships with different government organizations, you're going to have nonprofits, and then you're going to have residents that are part of the solution too. There's great trainings out there. The U of M has a really good training on BMP maintenance. And I think, whenever you have that group of people, it's whoever is doing the maintenance, you need different skill sets. You need somebody that can do, some level of construction or landscape construction, and you probably need a native plant expert. So varied skill sets are really helpful, I think, as well. And yeah, I think overall, there are so many BMPs out there, so prioritization, I think, is key.
And I think I'm glad you mentioned a lot of the things that I was going to mention, because leveraging assets throughout our communities. So when we have programs where we can train people, we have seasonal opportunities, we have full-time opportunities. There's other organizations that are not here today or maybe in the audience that we can also leverage. Master gardeners, master naturalists, programs like that, where citizens are getting trained and getting certified on things that are related to this and could help in some ways. An expert, plant expert, for example, could be pulled out of the Master Gardeners program. So I encourage people to look for those programs, look for those opportunities, think outside the box, all right, to try to look for folks that can help us manage all these stormwater control measures. That was an online question. Let's do an in-person.
Uh-oh.
So Rob was talking a lot about infiltration. In Minnesota, we have a lot of ponds, which are some sort of detention basin. I don't think that his statement on detention basins was that positive. So my question is, I said this is a two-part question. First, we have a lot of detention basins, 30,000 of them in the state. These are stormwater ponds and wetlands that have been plumbed to handle stormwater. Do you think that, what benefits do we get out of these detention basins, number one? And number two, is there something that we could do with selected detention basins to turn them into something else? Those are my questions.
I told you there'd be lots of easy questions, right?
It's not my area of expertise, so it is hard for me to say. I will say the one thing that we have, our experience with detention basins is often related to the vegetation surrounding some of the detention basins. And we have been able to, I think there are opportunities there for critical habitat development. And so working to not, and some of that has, ensuring maintenance access and all of the things that are required for detention basins. Again, I'm not a detention basin expert, but then working to maybe utilize some of those mowed areas or areas that could be transitioned to more native habitat. So, obviously there's the Lawns to Legumes program in Minnesota, which is really working to create pollinator habitat throughout the state. And so I do think there's some habitat opportunities surrounding the detention basins. And that's my experience with that.
You ask all the easy questions. Most of the ponds in Minneapolis were built for flood control. So any water quality benefit is really secondary to that flood control benefit when they were originally constructed. We are starting a project, again, it's in the very initial stages of looking at how can we retrofit those flood ponds. So we're not reducing the flood control benefits, but we're also providing a water quality benefit. We're not there yet. We don't have the answers to that. But on the habitat end, we have really looked at how can we use those ponds, add native plantings, use them for that habitat space, but also for a community space. Can we bring the community into these? Can we have planting events at them? So looking beyond just that engineering function of the ponds, but how can we, use that space a little bit differently for habitat, for community building?
It's a big opportunity. Frankly, in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of dry and wet ponds, as they call them. I always thought the biggest problems we have, frankly, is they're owned by individual homeowners association. So how do we get to them? And then basically that's going to create a maintenance cost, and they're not going to like it. But basically, you have a lot of areas you could build infiltration areas in the upstream parts of it, get rid of low flow channels. I find that you can probably restrict the underdrain, put a little weir in front of it or something to hold water back. We created a wetland out of one that had an underdrain water source going through it. You can't do that everywhere, but when it was built, it was probably an in-stream detention basin, and there's an underdrain. It was running full all the time. Chopped it up and made a very nice wetland out of it. So but each site is going to have to be a little more imaginative as you go through. And you could probably mess around with that low flow outlet without changing the flood control properties of it, I would think. But I would also want to do a study of some storm events of all the detention basins to see what really flow control you got, other than right downstream of the sites. I'm a little skeptical, other than a few miles downstream of the detention basins.
Sure.
Uh-oh.
So I would be interested to find a community. I think stormwater capture and use or reuse could be a huge opportunity to basically create volume in your system by having that extra water that's just sitting there typically being used for something like irrigation or wash water. You could recover. So it's another form of volume control, but in a more kind of retrofit type of situation. So I'd be curious to find a community that would like to work on doing maybe a district system or somehow trying that out. You're preserving your potable water for its better use instead of just something like irrigation, and you're putting a lot more capacity back in your system. So I think there's a lot of potential.
Other thoughts?
I'm going to say I'm on Team Pond. I still like ponds.
You still like ponds?
Yeah.
All right, that's okay.
Right BMP for the right place. I think
Yeah.
they have their place. When you see, we measure sediment, and you see how much sediment we're taking out of these things that otherwise would have potentially, ended up in the water body that's 50 yards away. So ponds have their place, and again, we're on a spectrum here. We're on a timeline. We're moving forward. So how can we enhance these things, I think, is the right question to ask. And yeah, maybe there's other things like different filter benches that can be lower cost solutions. Maybe some sites allow for infiltration on a pond bench to a certain height. So yeah, I think enhancement is probably going to be. I don't think we want to start filling in any ponds anytime soon. That's for sure.
The only thing I'll add is I want to build on exactly what has just been said. So multifunction use, using whether that's harvesting and irrigation or using that water for other things, even adaptive level control or continuous monitoring and adaptive control, CMAC is another term used for these smart systems. Taking advantage of that for whether it's reuse or just more flood storage and flood mitigation. Also, as Joe was just saying, these things can provide multiple benefits, but we also need a very wide toolbox.
Yeah.
Because all the sites are very different, and we often need multiple things to achieve all of the goals we're trying to get out of our stormwater system. So I think these things have, all of our stormwater tools have benefits and consequences. We have to match those together well, minimize the consequences as much, and maximize benefits. Good question, good comments. Was that online or was that in person? I think that was in person. Let's do online, and then we'll come back to in person.
A lot of green infrastructure planning is with the assumption that they are installed accurately and maintained regularly. Realistically, these two things are not always happening. How do we build simpler systems that need less hand-holding?
Build them right. I'm sorry, it's not that complicated. If you're compacting the bottoms, our site, we've had 25 years, minimal maintenance over 25 years. And of course, Villanova is a little cleaner than the I-95 in Philadelphia for sediments coming in. And those sites we're still seeing also doing very well. If you build it right in the first place, you have a good opportunity that you're going to be able to maintain it's going to be able to work. What the period of maintenance is, I don't know. But if you don't build it right, it's not going to work. you can't fix it very easily, and it's going to be very expensive. And so, I mean, one of the things we're requiring is post-construction testing of your sites before the contractor leaves. Do some flood tests, do some your little toy that you invented, John, and go through and look at the infiltration capacity to make sure it's actually working. And that's of interest to the client, to make sure he's not going to have to take a whole maintenance for years and pays a lot of money for maintenance based upon a poor construction or poor design systems. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not passionate about this, but we got to build these right. It's been 25, well, let's see, it's been a long time. We should know how to, they know how to build them right, but that means you have to pay attention to the inspection and before they're released. And until we get to the point where we're really forcing the contractors to build it correctly, and I apologize because there's a lot of really good contractors that do, but until we force that, it's not going to continue. So it's, I get tired of that question. It's a good question, but I get tired of it.
I love talking about this one. So there's design, there's construction, and there's maintenance, right? With design, I feel like here in Minnesota, we're doing a great job. We're far, well above a lot of other areas of the country. When it comes to construction, we do a really good job of making plan sets and making specs, and we put a lot of onus on what the contractor has to do to have a good project. And I would argue we do not put enough onus on ourselves to be there when the contractor is doing it.
Yes.
So you can have a lot of after-the-fact testing, but so many things get buried, and there is no substitution for having the designer, the expert, the decision maker who can direct the contractor face-to-face about what may or may not be happening correctly, or adjusting based on what site conditions are found. So there's no substitution for the designer,
Agreed.
the engineer being on site during construction. So that can be, however that's incorporated into our processes, but we're putting, I think, too much onus on the contractor to have every little nuance of expertise with a lot of different varying site conditions that might come up, and not enough on ourselves to be out there. And I'll let somebody else talk about maintenance.
We're actually putting that process into our manual.
Yes.
I need you to come to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so all the people argue that we don't need that.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, I can speak to this just from the perspective of like maintenance of vegetation specifically, and I would say the one thing that I often see is that not enough investment in the establishment period.
Yes.
And that's really causing a maintenance problem down the line. And some of that comes from the design, right? So the sites that we are seeing that are the most successful are very densely planted.
Yes.
Not just with forbs. I mean, we all love flowers, and that's wonderful, and that's a helpful way for public to interact positively with rain gardens and vegetated structures. But really having like that base of grasses and sedges that are covering the soil, so to outcompete weeds, to reduce maintenance later on, and planting that really densely so that they get a jump start, and maintaining them in that first year or two, watering those native plants deeply for the first year or two to get them established, and then we really see a successful project down the road. It's that establishment period that's so critical, and everyone thinks, oh, these are planted with native plants. I don't have to do anything to them, but they need to be cared for during establishment. And once they're established well, they can be a very low maintenance site. So I think that focus, and honestly, that funding and desire to pay up front for the plants that need to go in to make it more successful, as opposed to having to rip them out and replace them 2 years down the road because nothing was successful. We were talking earlier about native sod, which is new and starting to come out and being able to be implemented in some of our green infrastructure sites. It's such a dense root mass of native plants that it really is very successful at outcompeting a lot of those weeds that might come in, especially during that establishment period. It does need to be watered to get established. It doesn't look like landscaping, right? So it's a very diverse mix of plants. So just thinking through some of those from a vegetated perspective can really help reduce maintenance down the road. And I am a big proponent of a very dense planting matrix of grasses and sedges, something to really cover that soil, and then we can put flowers in that, and we see that be more successful.
That's great.
Yeah, where we've seen failures, it tends to be with the green, the vegetation piece. So For example, MnDOT has great specs for landscaping. We don't hold contractors to those specs, though. That's a big problem. There's regular inspections, there's regular reporting required there, but we don't hold our contractors responsible. I absolutely agree, though, that we need inspectors on site doing that rather than just relying on our contractors. Are there ways to simplify some of our inspections? Can we build, simple inspections, apps where it's easy to go through on your phone? Are there ways to make some of those inspections simpler so they're easier to do? But there is a level of accountability on both sides. We have a lot of great tools, but are we using them? Are we holding our contractors accountable to use them?
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Good.
We've got actually a question up here, came in before. Go ahead.
So maybe it's because St. Patty's Day is on the horizon, and I'm thinking about a pot of gold, and we love the dancing around of maintenance and what we've learned in 25 years, as Rob pointed out. I'm curious, if you had a pot of gold and you had to decide how to use that pot of gold, would you look at putting new BMPs based on what we've learned over the past 25 years, or would you look to retrofit what you have existing, because we've learned a lot that some may work, some don't work? So I'd be interested to get all your thoughts on the different perspectives you have.
You got a pot of gold. What are you going to do with it?
We don't. Minneapolis doesn't have. Yeah, we don't have a lot of BMPs to retrofit. We have ponds, which we're already looking to do that. We also have a lot of just urban corridors, roads, where we have no treatment because we've never had requirements to treat it. We've only had a stormwater management ordinance that required it for the past 4 years. I think there's a lot of opportunities there for doing new, but also, again, looking at those existing spaces. I know that was like trying to thread that needle. Thanks, Chris.
I was debating adding a third option, but I'll answer your question for real. I'll save that one. I'll save that one for the end. With the pot of gold, I would do maintenance. I would imagine a world where every single BMP that we have right now is transformed to be fully functioning as it was intended.
His answer.
I mean, we do maintenance work. I'm on Team Joe at this particular moment. So, yeah. I mean, I think that I think we could really, if we kind of boost what we have. I mean, I think we should continue to build new rain gardens 100%. And I also want to see the ones that we have just look good, be successful, and that would be a great start.
Can I split it into two piles?
Sure.
One pile, I definitely think that encouraging building of rain gardens off existing impervious, if I could give all the money to all the townships but a half-inch off all the parking lots, I think it would make a tremendous amount of good in the water quality of our systems. And the other half of the goal, I'd hire a lot more Rebeccas and a lot more grad students and do work to understand more the maintenance, as I said, can I take off 6 inches of soil? We're finding microplastics in the soil. We're doing that study right now and looking how deep they're going. And I think that if we took off 6 inches of soil on some period, we would basically recover some of the storage areas, maybe recreate some of the, it's not so easy if planted, but we would recreate some of the existing infiltration capacity and maybe get rid of some more of the pollutants and recharge that. We see the phosphorus in our soils is going down and filling up the receptacles and very slowly going down, but it's 4 feet deep. It's going to take a long time before that's going to be a problem. But how often do we do it? I think we need to know that to make it a lot easier, especially from the folks to the right of me.
Anything else you want to add to that? Well, I know I'm not a panelist, but I have the microphone, so I'm going to add a little bit. And it's all in support of what's been said. Number one, some of the work we've seen, watersheds don't have 100% of the impervious treated. So we definitely need more BMPs in some spaces. Every watershed's different. We definitely need to maintain the ones that we have, even potentially retrofit those to get them functional or adapt them to be more modern, to take advantage of multiple functions. And I'd say a third pile that I'd spend my pot of gold on is research. And yes, that's self-serving. But we have a lot of questions still. There was a lot of things I heard today that, that's not my area, or we don't know, or we're not there yet. That tells me we need more research.
Yep.
So, I think that's always going to work together to the future. Research, building into implementation, affecting design, construction, and long-term maintenance. I think all of it's needed.
And producing a lot of grad students who now know how to understand the green infrastructure.
Workforce development even, right?
Yeah.
That's right. Training them up so they know how these things work. All right. We are at the end of our time, so I'm going to close our panel discussion with our key takeaways. I'm going to ask each panelist to give me a key takeaway from today. It can be if you want to highlight something we said that you really want to reemphasize. It could be something new that maybe we didn't get a chance to say that you want to make sure gets into the conversation. But it's up to you to share. And we're going to start just as we did introductions at the far end of the table, my right, your left. And Jennifer, you get to go first. What are your key takeaways today?
Just building on the pot of gold metaphor, I'm going to add a fourth area for that pot of gold, which is education around what green infrastructure is, what rain gardens are. So like a key takeaway for me is still that that's still very much needed, that we need to be talking about clean water. I know I sound like a broken record, but like talking about that in general, making that really open, making something that everyone recognizes, I think ultimately will benefit our field and ultimately will benefit the success of these projects moving forward.
That's perfect. That's great. Joe, what would be your key takeaways?
I know this is about, green stormwater infrastructure, but I kind of want to talk now about my other pot. And I think, as practitioners, we shouldn't forget the big picture, right? The big picture is having cleaner water bodies, more usable water bodies. And we have all these tools within our stormwater toolbox, but stormwater BMPs is just also one aspect. So we also have source control, we have education and outreach, and we have in-lake treatments, right? When the goal is clean water. Each water body is different, and so my takeaway would be that source control, I think, is underrated. And again, if I had a new pot of money, I would use that pot of money to jump ahead 75 years and find a way that we can clean all of our hard surfaces in a way that is 4 times cheaper and more efficient. That's how I'd use my pot of gold. So that all of our BMPs are, the longevity is, expanded, they're more efficient in how they operate. We are taking all those pollutants out of the system from ever even entering the system in the first place. And we have cleaner cities in the first place as well.
Nice. That's great, Joe. Liz, what would be your key takeaways?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into making these functional systems. And I'm going to say that, BMP planning isn't more important or less important than design, than construction, than your vegetation establishment part, than maintenance, or, that research and monitoring. All of those have their place, and you can't succeed when you're really good at one and then you fail at the others, or where, you're great at all of them, but you fail at one of them. It really all has to work together in order to kind of have that successful end product. So we have to bring all of those pieces kind of together.
That's wonderful, Liz. Rob, you get the final word. What are your key takeaways?
Well, actually, one thing I've always been impressed by the efforts and the passion of the people in this area. Some of your organizational structures. I've been using your manual a lot when I'm rewriting ours. Not everything, but using the manual a lot. And I think one of the things I keep hearing, I didn't probably hear enough of it today, is the maintenance effort is a challenge. And one of the things I would probably take a little bit of that last pot of gold is we've been looking at drones and different remote sensing to try to figure out when to maintain. I mean, if a rain garden is very dry after a big rain, it's not working, right? The water's not getting there. If it's wet 4 or 5 days later, that might be a sense that some maintenance needs to be done. So how do we organize our maintenance so we just don't go out there every month or every 5 years, that we go out when it is needed on these particular sites? I think that's a big avenue. We're starting to play with it. We're doing some, and a lot of people are as well, but I think that is one thing on the horizon that might make some of our lives easier.
That's great. I love it. I want to thank our panelists and our speaker because this has been a wealth of nuggets of wisdom. This is actually probably a pot of gold of wisdom we've shared today. So I want to thank our panelists and our speaker. I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us today, both in person and online. It's so good to see so many familiar and friendly faces in the room. I hope more of you can join us in person at future seminars. Please check our website for the schedule to see what's coming up. As I said, there's some exciting ones coming up. We're going to be adding a bunch of new pages soon for the upcoming seminars. But for right now, I want to ask you to help me thank our panelists and Keynote for the presentation and sharing knowledge.
And the questions.